You're listening to the Hello World podcast, number 29. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. Today, I'm happy to welcome Rob Windsor to the show. Rob is a lead SharePoint consultant at Portal Solutions, a Microsoft Gold partner based in DC and Boston. He has more than 20 years' experience developing rich client and web applications in various languages and is currently spending a majority of his time working with SharePoint. Rob is a regular speaker at conferences, community events, and he authors content for Pluralsight. Rob is the founder and past president of the North Toronto .NET Users Group and has been recognized as a Microsoft MVP for his involvement in the developer community. I love speaking to Rob because he's always got a smile on his face and a story in his mind. I find his story interesting because he talks a bit about how he grew up at the same time that user groups were growing up in Canada and how that really affected the way he did development as well as his community involvement. Rob has always been a staunch supporter of community involvement, and today we talk a bit about that and how that influenced his career. Let's take a listen. Well, today I'm happy to have the birthday boy, Rob Windsor, on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How about yourself?
You having a good birthday?
Well, I worked. I celebrated my birthday last weekend, big family dinner. So,
oh, that's nice.
I sort of count that as my real birthday, and today is just sort of the accounting piece of it.
And from the way I, sort of watch, you're home about one day every 2 years. Is that right? 3 years?
Actually, I'm not traveling quite as much as I was. Actually, you mentioned Donald just a moment ago when we were in the pre-show. And we used to work together in Nova Scotia. So we would sync up in Toronto. He's from Edmonton. So he'd fly into Toronto. I'd get on the plane. We'd fly out there and fly home every weekend. So back then I was traveling all the time, but now it's every couple weeks I'm out. So it's not too bad.
But the good thing was you were going to, Nova Scotia where there's a lot to do.
Oh yeah. And we weren't in like Halifax or anything like that. We were an hour and a half north in Stellarton, which is, not necessarily the biggest city. So
sure.
It was
Halifax.
Fun. No, Halifax is actually quite a great city. It's a lot of fun.
But it's pretty small, right? 200,000 or something?
Yeah, I don't know the exact population, but it seems bigger than it is. I'll tell you that. It's really a lot of fun. It's way out there actually. If you don't think about it, or if you haven't ever looked at a map, like Nova Scotia is quite a bit east, even from like Boston. So
yeah, it's on the east side of Maine, really, for those of us in the United States. And it's in the other weird time zone, isn't it? Or is it still in the Eastern?
No, it's in the Atlantic time zone,
which I had never heard of until.
Well, there's a weirder one, which is like in Newfoundland, which is a half an hour difference from the Atlantic time zone. So,
well, that explains a lot about
that. Yes, it does.
Or Newfies is I keep on being told to call them. So, the nature of the show here is I'm really interested in how people got started, whether it was something they, learned in college or first computer when they were 6. How did your story start?
Well, it definitely wasn't when I was 6 because that was 1970. But I didn't really use a computer too much until post-secondary. So I had a friend who had a Commodore PET, in high school, and we used to do a little bit of stuff with that. He showed me the stuff that he was working on, and I worked fast food, and I did a little bit of management again while I was in high school. So we had a computer in the office, and then we linked up using the acoustic coupling of the phone receiver to the coupler. So I did a little bit of stuff there, but really nothing until I got to university.
And was this something you wanted to do in university, or was this something you found in university that you enjoyed?
Definitely found. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I took 3 years off between high school and university. And I wasn't the greatest student. My senior year English teacher asked me if I was taking the class by correspondence. So I wasn't really that great a student. And so when it came to post-secondary, originally, I applied to some places, but I had no clue what I wanted to do. And I would have been a horrible student if I had have gone right after high school. So I worked for a while, and it taught me a few things. It taught me some organizational skills, but it also taught me, what was out there for me as somebody with only a high school education. So when I went back, I was a lot more motivated. But again, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I kind of thought I would like to do teaching for some reason. I have no idea why, but I
ironically,
yes, yeah, absolutely. And I kind of had, well, I knew for sure that I didn't like anything where they spun the big wheel of marks to, mark your papers. So I wanted something where they could prove to me if I was right or wrong. So I went with math.
Oh, nice.
So I went to York University, and I was in the science side of things, not the arts. And we needed to take a computer programming course as part of the science program. And it was a Turing. We learned Turing, which is kind of Pascal-ish.
Yeah.
And I really kind of took a liking to it. And so my first couple of years, I kind of went back and forth between different programs. I started with math. I switched over to chemistry for a while. And then I finally settled on computers.
And when you were doing that original Turing work, what was that on? Was that on these big mainframes, or was that on?
Yeah. Well, I can't remember specifically what that stuff was on, but I remember the first 2 years I was actually in the computer science program, or doing a lot of computer science. It was Pascal on these old VAX machines.
Nice.
Those machines with the giant keys that had like arcane symbols on them, as well as the actual, so yeah, that was what I did for the first couple of years. And then they built a whole new computer lab. And the last couple of years was C on these awesome Silicon graphics machines. They were just stellar.
The old STGI machines.
Yeah.
And so that was all Unix.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. And so did you see this as the way you were going to make a living? Because I'm always curious about different universities and how they sort of look at the computer science degree. Were they really training you for real world, or were they getting you into, more esoteric discussions of projects that might be, more university oriented versus workplace?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't preparing you for to go out and get a job in a specific, with a specific language or using a specific tool. It was, we did all the standard stuff. We talked about data structures and, the big O notation and how, the performance of algorithms. So it was the theory behind programming. I had a compilers course, I think third or fourth year, where I built a Lisp interpreter in Lisp, and so obviously when I got out of school, I didn't find a job writing Lisp interpreters.
You sure? There's a lot of work for that. Still.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I wish there was kind of a mix of give you the theory, but also give you some practical hands-on on things that people would actually want when you got out of school.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
But you asked about a job and money. Actually, my real first job in the computer industry was while I was at university. I'm a big baseball fan, and in the early to mid 80s, a book came out called Rotisserie League Baseball. Mm-hmm. And it was these guys, I think in the New York area, that put together this baseball pool. And the book described obviously their league and their interactions, as people, but also how to run this league. So I got into this, and around the same time I was starting university, I was doing stats for a couple of the pools that I was in, and a couple of people said, well, hey, can you do stats for our league too? Because we don't have anybody, with a computer or access to the files and that kind of stuff. So, or the reports.
Right.
So can you do that for us? So I started it. It was Lotus 123 on a disk borrowed from a friend. On a
yeah. We know what that means. That's code word. Yeah. Copy.
On I believe it was an IBM AT and
nice.
two 5 1/4 floppies, no hard drive, 640K of RAM. That was my first computer.
Plenty of RAM.
Oh yeah, lots of RAM. So I used a Lotus, and at that time I didn't have any clue about how to use macros. So I entered everything by hand. I did everything every week. So I would enter the stats from whatever newspaper I could get that had the stats in them by hand. And then I would, resort the columns for the reports and then select the print areas and everything like that. And then I don't know if it was I think it was probably sometime in the first year. I had a couple of friends who were in business and they used Lotus all the time, and they clued me into the whole macro thing, and that
helps
really
a lot.
Saved me tons of time. So that was my first coding was writing macros in Lotus 123 to help automate these processes.
Wow. And do you still play fantasy football? I mean, baseball?
Absolutely. I'm still in the league. I was in first place up until last night. Dropped down. I'm in second now, but doing well.
That's fine. It's interesting that you and I have never talked about baseball, because fantasy baseball doesn't do a lot for me, but baseball itself, I'm an enormous fan of. So it was kind of interesting that, you and I have talked for what, 5, 6, 7 years, every conference that we seem to be at. And
it's been a long time.
And these, non-technical passions, we should talk about them more.
Yeah.
So you started with doing that Lotus, and you were still in college at the time, right? Yep.
So that became my job. So it was started out with Lotus. I moved to Quattro Pro at one point,
as we all did.
And then I remember writing a program in Pascal, and I remember my data was all like linked lists that I serialized out to disk, but I remember having serious memory issues. So I don't know if that actually got into production or not. But eventually, the last several years, it was all Clipper.
Nice.
So I started to pick up Clipper, and it wasn't in prep for the show. I just happened to be cleaning off a corner of my a desk that's behind me to move a printer, and I found a CD that had the last version of that program from 1998 on it.
Wow.
So I did stats from about 10 years. And the biggest year I had 42 leagues that I did stats for. So it was a real summer job.
Wow.
It was a lot of work.
And you're about to put that up on GitHub, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, now it's so crazy because, we have a stat site where, we get automatic updates as players are playing, so I can go online and see, who's up, if they're in the hole, what their count is, if there's runners on base while they're hitting, and that kind of stuff. So this was, when I first started, I was doing the reports, I think with 2-day-old stats, and then I was mailing out the results to people. So they would get them in the order of 5 to 7 days after, stale.
And when you say mail, you mean paper mail, you mean snail mail.
Yeah, paper mail.
That's crazy. And there are new stats, aren't there? I mean, like since I was a kid, there's WAR and like 14 new stats that were never ever talked about.
Yeah, so the sabermetric stuff that wasn't included. I mean, the one that wasn't usually talked about at that point in time was WHIP, right? So walks plus hits over innings pitched. Everything else was kind of the standard stats, batting average, home runs, RBI, stolen bases, wins, losses, saves, ERA. But now today, a lot of the leagues use the, less common stats like OPS or they won't use saves, they'll use or wins, they'll use quality starts instead of wins.
That whole argument.
Yeah. I mean, the availability of stats now is just, it's crazy.
It's great. And like you were saying, real time, if you had only, ported that Clipper app to a classic ASP site, who knows what would have happened.
Well, I did the last couple of years, just basically take the reports that I was printing out and build HTML pages from them.
Oh, nice.
And push those up onto the web. But that was, again, 98. It was, I guess classic ASP was probably around at that point in time, or maybe, or it was just about to be around.
Yeah, not ASP.NET, but classic ASP.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you graduated college. I assume you graduated college, and you had been doing, your job as doing the stats. What was that first corporate job out of high school, out of college like?
It was probably the most interesting job I had because it was for a company that built systems for insurance brokers, and the guy who ran it was a maniacal genius, I want to say. He wrote his own language, his own compiler, his own code editor.
Wow.
His own database, everything. So the name of the language was BPL, which was Bob's programming language, I believe. It was, again, Pascal-like, but it was interesting because, we would be editing code, and then the editor would all of a sudden start working funny because Bob was compiling and pushing out new versions of the exe as we were coding on, or to say the compiler, he would change the compiler and, so I did that for, I want to say 6 months, maybe. I don't think I got a year. And then switched jobs, and then that was Clipper for, probably a couple years anyway.
And Clipper was an interesting language. It was sort of a bridge between sort of the, scriptiness of DBase, but it was actually something compiled, and you had to worry about, setting up the overlays and all that other nasty sort of understanding how exes work stuff. Was that an interesting time? And did that inform kind of, the ease at which we develop these days?
Well, luckily, I got into it late in the Clipper timeframe. It was Clipper 5.2, so it was when CA had it. And, with Blinker and everything, really, I mean, everything was kind of well known at that point in time. So I didn't really have to get too much into that. But I did get into that before, when I was talking about writing that program in Turbo Pascal.
Yeah.
Where, very, very limited memory, and worrying about sometimes you were directly addressing memory, serializing out, like I said, the linked list I had to disk and that kind of stuff. There I was really sort of more programming against the metal than I was when I got to Clipper.
Sure. Yeah, I remember, I don't know how many years ago, but Jeff Richter gave a talk at a little conference in Boston, and he was introducing the idea of rebasing DLLs to improve startup speed. And just the idea now that you would dig down into, to lay out the DLLs in memory so that your app would start in, a minute and 15 seconds instead of a minute and 35 seconds is just, mind-boggling, because we assume that the platform is going to do all that for them.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with a few people. I mean, I think there's a few places where real optimization is still important. I mean, if maybe in the big data space, or if you're, maybe the SETI program where you're computing against, trying to compute several data sets at a time,
right.
Massive amounts of data sets at a time. But, I always think in university, we took the optimization course, and, we learned about the different sorting algorithms. And I'm sure there are people out there who spent their entire career trying to build a better quicksort.
I'm sure.
And today, no one even thinks about it, right? It's just, that's part of the framework. There's a sort on the collection type, and we just use it.
Yeah. There are those five guys who are really passionate about it, or it's awful. But even the guys that we think of as hardcore are using standard template library and all these other things as the full collections that we just don't think about anymore. Of course, we have a linked list. Of course, it just works, and of course, it works good enough that we don't have to really dig too deep.
Yeah. So I always wonder if how much of a difference it would make for somebody who never took the data structures course or never took a compiler course and doesn't really think about what happens. If they're a good business programmer, how different is their code from code who's somebody like myself, or who's gone through that, who understands a little bit more about what happens underneath?
Sure. Now that the platform is good enough.
Yeah, I mean, we're how many levels of abstraction higher than we were at that point in back in the 80s, the mid 80s, right?
Yeah.
It's actually at least 2 or 3 now anyway.
At least.
Yeah. So but I think it's still important to understand those things.
I think it can help, inform your code. It may not change the way you write code, but it certainly changes the way you think about code.
Yeah. I agree, 100%.
And so you did a lot of your development, sort of pre-debugger as well. I mean, I spent a long time in sort of the Clipper space, and debugging was, write line, or maybe you were fancy enough to have written a little logger that shoves stuff in a text file, but there was no, set a breakpoint here. And I'm sort of in the space now where I would hope that we could get back to a renaissance of reading code. This is something I'm very passionate about, because that's how you understood code before you just ran it and set breakpoints and hope that would inform you.
Yeah, I remember like going and printing out your code and then taking it off the printer and going away and sitting with it for a while and going over it and trying to see where you've gone wrong with, or if it's a bug, or how you can optimize it and that kind of stuff. Those days are long gone. They are.
I had an ex-girlfriend whose father was a programmer for the Navy, and he would bring home these reams of printouts, and he would go through them trying to find problems. And everywhere he found a bug, he would let her draw a little bug in the margin as the indicator of what he had to go back the next day and look at, which I thought was adorable.
Yeah.
The idea of, please write a real bug. So did you have early on? Did you have people that you sort of looked up to, or that helped form who you are as a developer today?
Well, one of the things I was very lucky. I worked with a gentleman, and early on, this is when I got the job doing Clipper, and he suggested that I go out and get involved in user groups.
Nice.
So pretty much, I mean, a year and a half out from university, I got involved in community, and I wonder even today if he hadn't suggested that, how much I would have gotten involved, because I think it changed my career immeasurably. My involvement in community. So yeah, that helped a lot, especially back then. I mean, geez, what did we have? We had books. There's a guy named Rick Spence who probably was the big, one of the big names in books in the Clipper time frame.
Absolutely.
I think I still probably somewhere in my office have his Clipper 5.2 book. And then CompuServe forums, those were around, and then it was other people.
Absolutely.
Right? So definitely getting involved in the user group community and sharing our experiences was really, really, really important early in my career in terms of my development.
Absolutely. So I like to ask this when the CompuServe word comes. Do you remember your number?
No, I still remember my school number though, but not my CompuServe number.
Every once in a while, someone will remember it because, for those who don't remember CompuServe, your ID was this 9-digit number, 4 numbers a common and 3 numbers if my memory is still good, and that's how you identified people. It wasn't Bob Smith or whatever. If you needed to connect with them directly, you had to know their number, and people printed it on their business card.
And towards the end of CompuServe, it was actually your email address as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah,
CompuServe.com, which was just crazy.
Yeah.
It's interesting because back then I had a harder time finding sort of the user group community, because it was pretty in its infancy as well. People were, wanted to be part of it, but it was hard to communicate. I don't know whether this was special about Clipper or not. I remember going to the CA World Conference in New Orleans one year, and for people who don't know the CA conference, it's enormous. They have a huge user base that aren't programmers, and so there were 65,000 attendees. Colin Powell did the keynote. It's a big event, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And they had all the Clipper guys over in a secondary hotel, and there were, I think, 42 of us. Out of 65,000.
65.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so even this like worldwide event, the number of people who were sort of in that programming space was still tiny in comparison. And I don't know whether that was because, people just didn't send people to conferences back then or what the deal was. But finding that community, CompuServe was the big win there. But actually getting out and finding the local user group or the other things, I just didn't know they existed until probably mid-90s.
Well, maybe I was lucky because we had a really active Clipper user group in Toronto.
Oh, nice. You Canadians are a lot friendlier, though. You have to admit that.
Well, we need to keep grouped up to stay warm, right? So, but if memory serves, we had like 20, 30, 40 people out at meetings. So
well, that's a big deal back then.
Yeah, and it was a very, very tight group. So it wasn't like a lot of user groups you go to, you see different people every meeting. This was the same people all the time. So yeah, it was.
There's actually a Fox Pro group here in Atlanta that's like that. I went and spoke there, and all these guys, they knew each other's wives and kids, and everyone just showed up every month, and have for 30 years or whatever the number is. It was just
if it's Fox Pro, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Very, very, very. I mean, it's a small group, but it's still a very, very tight group. They. I remember being there and the guy was like, has anybody heard from Mitch? Mitch isn't here and he's always here,
Right.
Like worried about him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So user groups certainly helped, that. Were there any sort of mentors, or did you find that helping other developers was something that, in organizations you were in was something you were able to do, or were you in one-man shops?
Probably early on in my career, it was definitely, I had one guy I worked with who sort of taught me the ropes around the Clipper business development piece of things. But for the most part in that time frame, I was by myself a lot. And then as we transitioned from the DOS days into the Windows days, I started doing Delphi. And again, very active user group community, but I also started working for companies. So there were some people in the community. Rod De Silva is one guy in the Delphi side of things. Also John Lamb, guys who I really looked up to, and were definitely very, very active and leading in the community at that point in time. But also, again, working with other people in an office and being able to bounce stuff off of them was also really, really valuable.
That's interesting. Did at the user groups, is that where you sort of got the taste for wanting to, give talks and teach people?
Yeah. Towards the end of my time with the Delphi groups, that's when I started speaking. And then I ran a group. I ran what was the VB.net group. Well, it was the VB group when it first started. It turned into the VB.net group. I ran that for 10 and a half years. So I started speaking with the Delphi group, and then I started speaking a lot more with the VB group, and that's when I started. Probably I can't. Go back to the year. Probably around the beginning of .NET or a little bit after, I started speaking at conferences.
Nice.
And that was that was sort of like the next step in community involvement is getting involved in the conference circuit.
And was that a natural progression, or was it something you were like, this is something I want to do, and so I'm going for? Or did someone ask you to speak, and you're like, I don't speak at conferences, I will, but
Well, so I spoke at the user group probably. I can't remember if I got volunteered or I volunteered. If you're involved in community long enough, you will get volunteered to speak.
Absolutely.
So I did that, and I spoke a few times. And then there's a sort of a very community-focused conference in Canada called DevTeach.
Mm-hmm.
And Jean Rene, who runs it, invited all the user group leaders across the country, basically to come to the conference. And so I did that the first time, and then I talked to him about potentially speaking at the conference, and that was the first. I don't think I spoke at a code camp or anything like that before that. So I think that was my first big conference.
Nice. That's a great conference.
It is. And Jean Rene, I mean, no one supports the community more than he does.
He's tireless.
Yes, absolutely.
And so now, my impression of you is that you're sort of a 50-50 split, or maybe not, that even, but you're still sort of getting your hands dirty with projects and code, as well as sort of taking the teaching route. I know you have done some courses for Pluralsight and other things like that. Is that a big part of what you're doing?
Yeah. It's probably right now, it goes back and forth.
Sure.
Right now it's probably, well, I don't want my editor to hear this, but it's a lot more coding than it is working on the course I'm supposed to be working on.
Don't worry, no one listens to this podcast, so you're fine.
But like last summer, I took from April to September off to focus on recording content.
Nice.
And my goal was, when I first did that I would produce a course a month, and of course I came nowhere even close to producing a course a month. But I definitely did have a chance. I think I did 3 or 4 courses over the course of the summer and a little bit into the fall. So
nice.
Yeah. So that was great. So there, it's just switching focus, and it's one of the great things. I consider myself to be extremely lucky because I have these options, and I think it keeps you fresh to switch focuses between the consulting work and the training work and doing the conferences and the community stuff. So I think all of those things are important.
Yeah, for a well-rounded developer. So are there any points in your career that you look back and think, this is, I wish I'd done this differently, or stayed at this company, or had, tried to get a job at this company?
No, I think one of the things that, and I'm not sure why I kind of went this route, but I was not hardly ever an employee of a company. I was a consultant or contractor almost all of the time. And I think that that's been beneficial, at least for me personally, the way that I used to work and so on. I don't know if it's for everybody, but there are definitely a few points in my career that I think have been sort of milestones and things that have really helped me evolve as a developer, or a professional. One was starting with the user groups I mentioned. The other was getting involved in the conferences. The third was sort of a byproduct of I received the MVP award for running the user. I assume running the user group was a big part of receiving the MVP award. And I remember my first MVP summit. I saw Mark Dunn, and at that point he was a co-host on .NET Rocks. And I just walked up and said, "Hey, Mark, how's it going? I listened to the show. I just want to tell you I really enjoy it." And he said, "Hey, come on, sit down." And we talked for a while, and then we went over to the Weston Lobby Bar, where everybody from the MVP Summit at that time
where the real
went.
Meetings happen. Yeah,
exactly. And I met a whole bunch of people, and I think that I just I don't know if that specific point, but just getting the idea that it's okay to walk up to people and say hi and talk to them, and then being able to be the beginning of the networking with people in the community who I've learned so much from, I think was another sort of a big point in my career in terms of professional development. So
that's great.
That stands out for sure. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you one more question that I'm curious about, because you spent a lot of your career as a contractor and consultant. And do you think that's a product of just sort of the nature of the kind of work you were doing, or are you like me in that you get bored, and being in the route of being an independent or a contractor or a consultant, whatever you want to call it, allows you to be sort of in that continuous learning pattern?
Well, definitely, that's one of the things that I love about our industry, is that you are continuously learning. But I don't know if that has to specifically be because you're a consultant or a contractor. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that to be a good contractor, you have to continuously learn. But I think the same would apply to an employee at a lot of companies.
Sure.
I think there's a few reasons. One, I don't think I'm good at like working for other people.
The game politic, is that what you mean?
Oh, I'm so bad at that. I just don't have any patience for it whatsoever. And also, I'm not productive 9 to 5. To sit at a desk all day and work is not, it doesn't fit, just my productivity, the way my lifestyle.
Sure.
So a normal day for me, I'll get up, start working 7:30, 8 o'clock sometimes. I'll work for, until the mid morning and then sort of wander off and do some stuff. And then I'll work through the afternoon and then again, go do things and then work again in the evening. So, I put in a full day for sure, but I don't do it from that 9 to, the hours of 9 to 5.
More in short sprints than the marathon of an 8-hour day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that, if you've been doing development for long enough, you've been in the car or in the shower and the solution to a thing you've been working on that's been kind of getting you, all of a sudden comes to you, right? Because I think that, the subconscious part of your brain is working on that, even though you're not actively working on it. So there's been so many times where there's been times where I've gotten out of bed at night to come down and finish a piece of code that I was struggling with. So I think for me, taking those breaks just gives that other part of my brain the opportunity to spin some cycles.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's been a great talking with you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. You enjoy have you guys actually had a spring yet in Toronto?
It finally got here. I was in Boston last week. When I got home, there was actually green grass and some buds on the trees. So
wow,
it took, but this winter was so horrible. It was just
long.
Yeah, I got away as much as I could. Thank goodness. I was I think 3 weeks in Florida and a week and a half in Vegas, so I missed a lot of it, but I still got a lot of it too.
I bet you.